guys, it's Faye and I am back with an all-new video. Today's topic is a deep dive behind the veil psychic energy read into the musician Jimi Hendrix. So we are going to be exploring why he was truly such a phenomenally gifted musician behind the veil, as well as the occurrences of what really happened on the day that he permanently crossed out of his body. This and so much more. Now, before we get into the energy reading portion on Jimi Hendrix, we're first going to begin by exploring some very necessary three-dimensional information into who he was, as that is going to be laying the groundwork for the energy reading portion on him. So even if you think you know there is everything there is to know about Jimi Hendrix, I encourage you, please do not skip this section. So here we go. Jimi Hendrix, who was born Johnny Allen Hendrix on November 27th, 1942, and had permanently crossed out of his body on September 18th, 1970, was an American guitarist, songwriter, and singer. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest and most influential guitarists of all time. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1992, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame describes him as, quote, arguably the greatest instrumentalist in the history of rock music, end quote. Born in Seattle, Washington, Hendrix was of African American and allegedly Cherokee descent. He began playing guitar at the age of 15, and he played for hours daily. By 1969, Hendrix was the world's highest paid musician, earning $125,000, which is the equivalent of $1 million by 2025 standards. In 1962, he began drinking alcohol, and he first used LSD in 1966. And despite being naive and inexperienced with psychedelics, just 1 year later, in 1967, he regularly used cannabis, hashish, LSD, and amphetamines. When he drank in excess or mixed drugs with alcohol, he became angry and violent and got into drunken brawls. Now, the details surrounding his death are disputed, and there is only one witness to his final hours who had found him unresponsive at 11 a.m. on September 18, 1970. He was pronounced dead at 12:45 p.m. that same day. Now, the coroner had concluded he aspirated on his own vomit and had died of asphyxia while intoxicated with barbiturates that he had taken. Now, he had taken 18 times the recommended dose of sleeping tablets on September 18th, 1970. This is going to conclude the three-dimensional information share on Jimi Hendrix, and we are now going to begin by exploring the energy read into him. As soon as I had connected to his energy, it was shown to me that Jimi was phenomenally gifted. As in, he was clairvoyant, claircognizant, clairsentient, and clairaudient. Now, if you don't know what all of these clear abilities are, I'm going to break them down. So these are different than our three-dimensional senses, which is what I would refer to as our basic bitch senses. So that is anything that you can smell, see, hear, touch, and taste. That's our three-dimensional senses, but these clear abilities are extrasensory perceptions. So therefore, they're more of a metaphysical nature. And what are they? Somebody that is a clairvoyant is someone that has the gift of so-called clear vision. This is somebody that can either see potential timelines that can play out, potential futures, or they can even see the way things work behind the veil. Somebody that is claircognizant has the gift of clear knowledge. This is going to show up as somebody that just knows things without knowing how they know it or without having any evidence to support their knowing of it. Somebody that is clairsentient has the gift of so-called clear feelings, as in they can decipher the feelings of other people. Now, in addition to that, Jimi Hendrix was also an empath, so he very much could feel the energy and the emotions of other people when he was around them. Now, he was also clairaudient, and clairaudience is the gift of so-called clear hearing. Now, this is when a person might be alone in their room and they can hear another voice talking to them. So this is basically the gift and ability that gets people labeled as crazy or psychotic because they hear voices. So they might be alone in their room and they hear a voice as if somebody is speaking to them. That voice is actually probably their guides or their guardian angels, or it's even their higher self communicating with them. Now, somebody that is also clairaudient can get flashes of insight and inspiration. So Jimi Hendrix had all of these gifts and abilities. He just didn't know that he was gifted, because experiencing the world through the lens of all of these gifts and abilities was as inherent to him as breathing was. Now, because he was so highly gifted, this is also going to explain why he was such a gifted musician. So imagine this, because he was so highly gifted, there was, if you will, an invisible string that was tethering his soul directly onto the other side. And it is on the other side where he was receiving the inspiration for the music that he was creating. Now, being gifted is in fact our natural state of being, but we are all veiled in varying different degrees. But again, because Jimi Hendrix was so phenomenally gifted, he did not experience the world through being veiled or any level of barriers. So because he had no barriers and he was not veiled, that allowed him to easily and seamlessly connect to the spirit realm and to pull inspiration and access inspiration from the other side that he brought in through the tether or the invisible string that connected him directly to the other side. But again, he did not know that he was gifted, because he experienced the world without any veils or without any barriers. And being this phenomenally gifted was just as inherent to him as breathing is. So picture this. You have a deeply gifted person who does not know that they are gifted because their gifts and abilities are inherent to them as breathing is. But this person is interacting with other people in a world that are deeply veiled and deeply calcified pineal glanded people. So this creates a high level of contrast between the way in which Jimi Hendrix experienced the world and the way in which he experienced the world interacting with other people. Therefore, life at times could in fact be rather torturous for him. So it's kind of like being awake in a world full of sleepers, pre-internet, where you cannot find other like-minded people. So perhaps then you yourself can understand why Jimi Hendrix would do anything to escape the inevitability of the banality of his life. which is why he did start using drugs. And oh boy, if Jimi Hendrix was gifted before because he had that tether that permanently connected him to the spirit realm, well, doing drugs blasted him wide open. So now it was not just a tether that was connecting him to the other side, it was like he was living in two worlds simultaneously. His physical body was here in the 3D material earth plane, but his soul was permanently connected to the spirit realm. So it was his body that was here in the 3D material plane that was performing what it was his soul was accessing from the other side, as in the spirit realm. And what he was accessing through his soul was funneled into his 3D material body. Because again, once he was using drugs, it was like he was living in two worlds simultaneously. Now, it was again the drugs that had blasted him wide open and now enabled him to be living in two worlds simultaneously. So Jimi Hendrix, to begin with, was incredibly gifted. Now with the addition of drugs, it blasted him wide open, and it was no longer just a tether that was connecting his soul directly to the other side. It was in fact where he was living two realities simultaneously. So for somebody like Jimi Hendrix, that might have been a high vibe experience for him. But when Jimi Hendrix would drink alcohol, or he would mix alcohol with the drugs, that actually was a low vibe experience for him. Now, this is not just for somebody like Jimi Hendrix, and if you want to learn more about alcohol, I have a video that I have previously done, which I have linked down below. But alcohol is inherently a low vibe substance. And this is going to explain why when Jimi Hendrix would drink alcohol, or he would mix alcohol with drugs, he would act violent and angry, and he would get into drunken brawls because the alcohol was lowering his vibration. Therefore, in a lowered vibration state, it was creating an angry and violent version of Jimi Hendrix. But let's return back to Jimi Hendrix when he was in the high vibe. So he was consuming drugs, and this was enabling him to live in two realities simultaneously. His body was in the 3D, his soul was on the other side, and when his soul was on the other side, he could access inspiration and funnel it back into his body, which was on this side. Because what he was accessing, what he was creating, wasn't something that he found here, it was something that was actually on the other side. So if you want to know what the frequency on the other side feels like, it was shown to me that the people who saw him perform live when he was under the influence of drugs got just a teeny tiny taste of it. The music that Jimi Hendrix would perform live when under the influence of drugs was trance-inducing because it was a frequency so unlike anything that they had ever experienced here, because again, it wasn't from here, it came directly from the divine realm. So all of this sounds great, right? Jimi Hendrix, highly gifted to begin with, consuming drugs, blew him wide open so that he could live simultaneously in the 3D material realm as well as the spirit realm, where he could access incredible frequencies and music that he could funnel in and bring down into his body, right? Well, unfortunately, the more drugs that Jimi Hendrix did, because again, I'm going to remind you, in 1966, he was a novice. However, just one short year later, in 1967, he was consuming LSD, cannabis, hashish, and amphetamines. So his drug usage really had ramped up. So because of that, the more drugs he consumed, the harder it was for him to come back down to the banality of life. Now, the drugs also further created contrast for him to experience. So he already had experienced high levels of contrast due to the fact that he was highly gifted before he was using drugs, and he was interacting with deeply veiled and deeply calcified pineal glanded people. So he was already experiencing contrast pre-drug consumption. Now he was using high levels of drugs, and this was creating high levels of contrast for him. So the high levels of contrast that he was experiencing created a really, really deep divide and a further disconnection within himself. So it was amplifying, if you will, contrast, and in addition to amplifying contrast, it was making it harder for him to exist in the 3D material world. And because of that, life on this side, as in life on the earthly domain, lost all color and lost all meaning to him. This is going to explain why in just one short year span of time, his drug usage had really, really ramped up. It was a disconnection, and it was a level of contrast that was deeply disconcerting for him on a soul level. However, despite the fact that life on the 3D material plane had lost all color and lost all meaning to him, it does not mean that he was thinking about unaliving himself. No. Because it was not shown to me that he was suicidal or had any suicidal idealization. He would not have intentionally done something that would have led to him permanently crossing out of his body. However, it will explain why he had made some questionable decisions, such as taking 18 times the recommended dose of sleeping medication. So Jimi Hendrix kind of played Russian roulette with his life. Like thinking to himself, I wonder what will happen if I take this much sleeping medication. Well, what happened on the morning of September 18th, 1970, when he did in fact take an excess of sleeping medication, was that he had fallen asleep, and the next thing he knew, he was out of his body, but this time for good. So this was not taking high levels of drugs and having his 3D body in the 3D world, but having his soul on the spiritual domain. This was where he was out of his body for good, and his soul was permanently on the other side. And it was shown to me that once he was permanently out of his body, his soul had stood over his 3D body and just looked down at it. He looked down at himself and felt nothing. There was no attachment to his body, no remorse, no regret, and no longing to get back into his body and to live. There was none of that. Instead, he looked around and he realized in that moment why he felt no remorse and no regret. It was because he had spent much of the last 3 years primarily out of his body in the first place. So his soul, being on the other side, felt familiar to him. In fact, it even felt comfortable. So in that moment, when he looked down at his body and he realized he didn't feel any remorse or any regret, and that being on the other side felt comfortable to him, he had shrugged and he started walking away from his body, flanked with his guardian angels by his side, and he never looked back. This is going to conclude the energy reading into Jimi Hendrix. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this video, perhaps found it to be thought-provoking. I encourage you to please take what resonates, leave the rest behind, and as always, and until next time, stay in the high vibration.